Hello everyone, my name is Cory. I'm with Avid CNC. Welcome. I'm joined here today with Sammy in the chat, and we're going to be reviewing Mach4. I'm not going to review the install or setup of Mach4 today. That's pretty well documented in our support documents. They will be linked below. If you have any questions or issues setting Mach4 up on your control computer, please don't hesitate to reach out to our support team and they'll get you squared away. But what we're going to be talking about today is once you got Mach4 set up, where do we go from there? We're going to talk about some of the special features that Mach4 includes. I'm also going to show you some tricks that I like to use just to make my workflow go a little bit faster or more efficiently. And then we're going to field some questions at the end. So let's dig right on into this, all right? So here's the Avid CNC Mach4 screen set. And the fact that we have one of our own Mach4 screen sets is, and we can manipulate that, is one of the really special things about Mach4 over Mach3. So not only is it screen sets that we can configure, but it's everything else within the software, right? And so when you first set up, you'll get this window here, and it allows for you to do a machine selection. And so this is all done through additional programming that Avid has done, and through a Lua language, and so we have a lot of additional features here in Mach4 than you could ever have in Mach3. So we have our different machine configurations here that we typically sell. You can also choose custom, and we will review later when we're talking about limits why having the correct size here is important. We also have some different advanced options, and if you have older version machine, we have some revision stuff. We have some custom stuff, and then you can also find out what version of Mach you are here in the about, and also if you're ever having issues and you want to reach out to our support team and we ask you for your profile, this is where you would get your current Mach4 profile. Mach4 is constantly updating its profile as you use it. And so in the event that you do experience a computer crash or a power outage or something like that, you might need to restore a previous version of your Mach4 file, and there's instructions for that on our website. All right, so once we've configured the machine, the first thing I like to do is I like to test and make sure all my limits are mapped correctly. And so you can do that through the diagnostics screen here. And if you put a piece of metal in front of your sensor, you're going to see that those sensors light up right here on this screen. And so I like to go around the machine and review that every sensor is in the right place and reading in the software before I go to home my machine for the first time. When you home your machine, you use this button here, and homing the machine brings it to your machine coordinate home position. Now, the home position can be placed in any corner of the machine. Generally speaking, our pre-configured setup is in the lower left, and that's actually a really good point. When you're first setting up your machine, I would really encourage you to set it up in a stock configuration rather than something custom. That has a couple benefits, and one of them allows for you to know that everything is working as expected. And so as you go to customize, those customizations should also work as expected, and we can make sure that that flow is correct. So generally speaking, I would say let's start with our normal configuration, and then we customize from there. And so homing the machine brings it to your home position. That is typically in our 0, 0, XY in the lower left-hand corner of the machine. And once we have the machine home, now we can set our work coordinate, right? And so the work coordinate can be set 3 different ways. You can move the machine to where you want it to go, and you can set the value here, right, in the digital readout. You can use our AutoZ touch plate feature. This also sets your work coordinate. You can just do the Z, or if you choose one of our XY positionings, lower left-hand corner is a very typical one that I use. You need to make sure you put your tool diameter in there and go ahead and go through that sequence. There's more on our touch plate in another video, link below. Let's go ahead here and stop that sequence. The third way to set a 0 is by using this offset tab, and we're going to review this more in a future video. But you can have your offsets tab set your position. So if I knew my work coordinate 0, 0 was 6 inches from my machine coordinate 0, 0, I could type in 6, 6 here, and that's going to act just like the touch plate in setting the XY position. All right, let's talk about limits. And so here's where you would check your limit switches. If you go to the jogging screen, here's where you can override your limit. And so if you do hit one of your limits and the machine is locked in, that limit is engaged, this is where you would go to override that limit so you could move the machine away from it, and then you would go ahead and turn your limit switches back on and address why you crashed the machine. Our systems also use soft limits, and soft limits I call force fields. And so this is short for software limit, and this is set up so it will actually, the software will stop your machine from physically hitting the limit switches. And when you choose your machine size and the configuration, that helps us determine what soft limit settings you should have. And so generally speaking, once I home my machine and then drive it within the soft limit work area, I will go ahead and turn that green, and that will prevent me from physically crashing into my limits. The machine will stop before it hits it. If you want to change your soft limit settings, you can do that. Let's go and look at that real quick here. So we're going to disable. We're going to go to Configure, Avid CNC Machine Configuration. We're going to go to Customs, and we're going to say Use Custom Soft Limits. See, I already had this checked. Let me move this so you can see it right here. So we're going to click Use Custom Soft Limits. We're going to click Save. It's going to update our configuration file. We're going to go to Machine Setup. We're going to hit Soft Limits. And this window will pop up, and you can see our 4x8 machine here has a soft limit of 49.5 and 97. And if you wanted to change those values, you could do so there. If you wanted to disable one of the axes from having soft limits, you could do that here as well. Speaking of the machine setup tab, if you have one of our plasma systems or rotary unit, you can access that here. I'm not really going to review plasma specific Mach4 instructions today. I'm going to stick to the router side of the things, but this is where you would go into plasma mode. And then you'd have all your torch height control settings and plasma settings there. So perfect. Yeah, so with our limits here, with the soft limits on, we can now operate with the keyboard or our jogging buttons, I feel like with more confidence, right? When I know I'm not going to physically crash into the bumpers because the software is going to stop the system from doing that before it physically does that, I can be a lot more aggressive with my jogging. If I want to slow my jogging down, you can do that right here with your jog rate. And when you use the arrows, it moves in 25% increments. And you can also click on jog rate and type in a value, and it will display it here. And so that's now what the machine's going to move at when I drive and jog the machine. 100% brings that back to our typical jog rate of 600 inches per minute. This is a good point. These jog rates are set in our motor tuning. And so let's look at that. Typically, I wouldn't advise people to change any of their motor tuning settings. But if you do, you'd go into Configure and Control. If you notice Control here, actually you cannot click. And that's because our machine is enabled. And so we want to go down here to the bottom. We want to disable the machine. We want to go back up. We want to hit Configure, Control. That's going to bring up our control configuration window. We're going to go to Motors. And you'll see here when it first opens up, it's blank. And that's because we have to select the motor here in the right-hand column. And so motor 0 is our X motor. And you can see here we have our counts per unit, our velocity, and our acceleration. This velocity setting typically aligns with our jog rate limit here in Mach. So if you want to permanently adjust your jog rate, you could change the velocity here. And if you wanted to adjust the acceleration or the speed your system gets up to the jog rate, you would adjust that here. Generally speaking, I wouldn't advise that you change these unless there's a very special purpose. One other tip in this area, before you go to a different motor, make sure you hit apply if you have any changes, and then you can toggle from different motor. And we go X, Y, Z, slaved motor, auxiliary motor. And so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 goes X, Y, Z, slaved, auxiliary. And yeah, so make sure you hit apply after each motor, and also that your two slaved motors have the same settings. So we're going to hit OK, and that's how you would adjust your jog rates. One other tip, a lot of people ask me about Mach4 and pendants, and while there are some pendant solutions out there, I really find my mouse to be significantly more valuable than a pendant. My mouse allows for me to do a lot of different types of actions in Mach4, and I use a wireless mouse, and so it can go all over my machine, right? When you have a small working cell, a pendant makes a lot of sense, right? A vertical machining center where typically the operator is going to be in a very small footprint of space. A pendant makes a lot of sense in that type of scenario. Our systems are not typically that size, right? Typically our clients are moving all around that system. And so a wired pendant does have some advantages, but I really feel like the mouse is a better tool. And let me show you why. So we can adjust our jog rates, we can move the machine. We also have incremental movements. And what this means is the machine is only going to move in this value. And so if I want to move it 1 inch, every time I click the button, it's going to give me 1 inch of movement. And if I hit increment jog step, it reduces that to 1/100th of an inch. And for me, this is exactly the high value of a pendant, is being able to really dial in your machine when you're at the spot. Well, this allows for you to do that increment jog step down to 1/1000th of an inch, and we can move that machine. One tip there is I like to have a big screen. So if you have an old TV or something like that where you can duplicate your computer screen and you can put that big TV on one of your walls, I find that to be really valuable with the mouse, because really then I'm not doing any type of squinting, and anywhere I go on the machine I can have pretty much full control with the mouse. So yeah, so that's going to be our jogging area right here, and we'll make sure we go back to continuous movement. And soft limits are on, perfect. All right, our next topic here is going to be, let's talk about the G code field here. So let's load some G code. So we got our machine set up, we're moving around, we got our limits working. One of the next things we're going to do is load code into the system. So we're going to go ahead and hit load G code here. It's going to bring up our most recent file here. I'm going to choose this Pocket program. And here we go. So the G code falls right here in this window. You can scroll up and down, and you can see that I'm using vcarve, and it has a couple features with our post processor, including giving me my material size and tools being used. And right here is my tool number. You can see that right here. If you go to our tool change section, your tool number is here. And I typically do one tool per G code file. And when I come to go to my next file, I just close and open the next G code file. I have that preference because I have my tool information and my zeroing information at the top of each program. And if you have multiple tools within the same program, you're going to want to make sure that your first tool and your current tool are lined up. And you can set a manual tool change location here. And so that is, if you want to drive the machine to a certain place for tool changes, you'd set that here, and then you could click go to MTC location every time that tool change was going to happen. So that's what's going on right there. Okay, and so we got our G code loaded, and let's talk about another cool thing in Mach4 that we can do here. And so we can edit the G code. And so if you click this edit G code button, you're going to see a window pop up. I'll bring it over here shortly. And this is going to be our G code edit screen. And we're going to have all of our G code lines here. And so when you see your current G code line, you can find it right here in your G code. It's on the left-hand column in gray. And why would you want to come in and look or edit your G code? Well, one of the things that I like to do is I like to remove lifts from pocketing tool paths when they're excessive. If I'm doing a large pocket, I don't necessarily need that tool to lift after each depth of cut. And so I will come in here and I'll use the Control F function and I will search for that lift move. And so if you scroll down here, we can see here's my lift move, a G1Z equals 0.2 F10. That is my in V-carve, that was my my movement position is 0.2 over the material. And so I could go in and use Control F and find those lifts and then remove them. I also could go down here to the bottom of the program and you can set your home position in your CAM package. Typically my home position is set at 0, 0 work coordinate. But if you wanted to move the machine to a different position at the end or at the beginning, you can go in here and you can see here GX0Y0. I can change this to GX0Y16. And so what that's going to do is at the end of the program, instead of bringing it to the front and potentially covering my workpiece with the gantry, it's going to park it 16 inches back. And I find that to be really helpful if I'm going to do any multiple of programs or parts to move the machine out of the way so I can load those parts into my work holding fixture and then go ahead and start the next run. So yeah, once you've changed your G code or looked, you can go ahead and hit save the current file. It's going to save it automatically. You then just close out and it's gone ahead and updated this. If I go down to the bottom here, you'll see that my last move here is ending in Y16. So that's going to move the machine back up 16 inches away from where we were. So yeah, we covered touch plate, we covered jogging, we covered tool changes, we went through machine setup and offsets. If you're using metric, you can use the change units to millimeters, and it will instantly convert everything over into millimeters. Typically, your CAM package is also going to have a imperial or metric setting with a G20 or G21 command. So that's why it says G20 here is in inches, G21 is in millimeters. And that should be either set in your CAM package or your native units here in Mach4. And no matter what you're programming in or using here in the system, as long as there's a G20 or G21 in your program that matches what those units are, we're going to cut it correctly here in Mach4. Go to work XY0. This can be sometimes nice when you set your work position and you want to move back over to that position. If you want to toggle between machine coordinates and work coordinates, I like to do this a lot when I'm manually setting an offset here. I will drive the machine close to where I might want to put a fixture, and if I see that was at 4.8 and 1.1 inches from my machine coordinate, I might then change this to 5 inches and 1.125 inches, because those are much more memorable numbers. And if I needed to come back to that position at any time in the future, 5 inches and 1 inch and 1/8 is a far more memorable number. So yeah, let's go ahead and, it's a live stream, welcome. Let's go ahead and maybe see if we have any questions here from our audience. I wish the Auto Z touch plate and limit switch had still worked. They all sort of stopped recently. Well, if any of your limit switches or Auto Z touch plate isn't working, that's most likely a corruption in your Mach4 file because of incorrect stall or closing of the program or power outage. And so go ahead and restore your profile, and that should reset any limit switches that might not be working. What's the question here? Is it safe to stop and restart a program in Mach4? And this is a great point, right? So generally speaking, I tend to only use the red button or my emergency stop if it's in dire need, right? And I call that a traumatic stop. And the more you operate the machine, the less this should happen. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it should happen less. Generally speaking, I'm not going to use the e-stop button if I have any time to react. I'm going to use the feed hold button. And so that's this yellow button here. Your keyboard space key also is the feed hold button. And the feed hold button is going to stop the system at the next convenient place. And so it's going to allow for us to decelerate the machine and stop at a known point. And when we stop at a known point, now we can move the machine. So once it's stopped, you can hit the stop button. You can come back here to your jogging screen. You can lift your Z axis up. You can move your Y, and you can make the adjustment that you need to do. You can move your Y back, and you just get pretty close to where you were, and go ahead and make sure your spindle is still on and hit cycle start, and you're going to resume the program exactly where you stopped. Right? It's going to go back to where it stopped, and then it's going to resume that program. So generally speaking, the emergency stop button is for exactly that. It's for an emergency. If I'm noticing that I'm getting close to a screw, or that my work holding is becoming less strong than I would like, I am not hitting the emergency stop button. I'm hitting the feed hold button, right? In the event you do hit the emergency stop button, some people say, well, how do I get back to where I was in the program? Well, I tend to not start G-code in the middle as a practice, because G-code files can be really long, and sometimes you think you're in a different place than you are. So I typically approach this in two ways. I'll go ahead and rehome my machine. I will make sure all of my offsets are still set in the same place that they were when I started, and I'll just start that program over fresh. If it's a short program, I'll be cutting air for that area before I hit my emergency stop, and then once I get to that, it will continue cutting. If I have a longer program, I will go back into my CAM package, and I will use the same 0, 0 position, and I will just reprogram the rest of the parts that didn't get cut out, right? And when you do it that way, you're starting a fresh new program, and you're only cutting the areas where you haven't cut yet. You're not going to do any air cuts, and you know that you're going to start exactly where you expect for it to start. So generally speaking, I'm not going to start in the middle of a G-code file if I restart, but I typically don't do that because I use the feed hold button if I ever do need to pause a program, and that allows for me to move my system, make the adjustments to the workpiece or the tooling or whatever needs to be adjusted, and then move the system back into place and resume that program exactly where I stopped. So yeah, what's my next question here? How do you move in smaller increments using jog? So I reviewed that earlier. We're going to go ahead and have timestamps down at the bottom, so if you need to go back in the beginning at any point, you can. Is it worth upgrading Mach 4 from Mach 3? And so generally speaking, I do think so. And Mach 4 has a number of very nice features with our touch plate, and it is the supported program here at Avid. But if your Mach 3 system is working and you're comfortable in that environment, and your control computer is still working appropriately, then you don't have to upgrade. And that's one of the beautiful things about Mach, is it is a lifetime license. So yeah. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Thank you guys so much for attending. We're going to be doing more live streams on different topics. If you have any topic suggestions, please go ahead and send us an email or put them in the comments below. I'm getting one more question. Is stop and e-stop button the same thing as feed hold? No, the stop button and e-stop button are not the same as feed hold. Feed hold is very different. Feed hold is going to allow for you to change, or allow for that movement to continue until a known stoppable point happens, and then you would hit stop. And stop and e-stop are going to be the same if you haven't hit feed hold. And so if the system is actively moving and you hit stop, it is not going to